Hey, you lovely lot, and Happy New Year, and welcome back to Crime Analyst YouTube channel and the Intelligence Cell. I hope you had a good Christmas break and a good holiday, whatever you were doing, and you had a good start to 2024. And I know so many of you have been wondering when part 3 of my deconstruction was going to be posted. And my deconstruction of the longest title in the world, the independent external review of Lancashire Constabulary's operational response to reported missing person Nicola Bulley, the College of Policing review, long awaited, that was published in November at the end of last year. And I have been deconstructing this, and you'll see lots more stickies there because I've been going back through it all, and I've been deconstructing this report in particular across multiple episodes because it is so detailed and there's a lot of information to share with you. And before I dive back into it, I do just want to say thank you so much to all of you who have sent me such positive comments and support. I really appreciate it. Thank you. It really does take a lot of time to go through a report like this and check with other source material, to rewatch my previous videos and interviews and other interviews as well, and some of the things that you have said to me, go and watch this or look at this article. And I've also had conversations with Peter Faulding, and I've looked at the sonar evidence that Peter has as well, and I've talked to many others about the case. So it does take time, and suffice to say that I'm also covering many other cases right now, and I've been involved in reinvestigating the disappearance of Marian Barter on my podcast. I've been involved with that case since 2019, missing mum of 2, Marian Barter, who took a plane from Australia to the UK in 1997, and her daughter Sally never saw her again. And Sally has been searching for her mother for 27 years. So I do take my casework very seriously. I've been talking with various other people about that case on The Lady Vanishes, a podcast which I highly recommend to you. And I've been covering the case in depth, talking to Sally, talking to some of the super sleuthers and others on Crime Analyst. Part 12 will drop on Tuesday the 9th. So do catch up. I'm talking about the circumstantial evidence there. Marian went missing. She had a relationship with a man who put herself on her timeline, and he is a serial perpetrator, and I've been deconstructing the behaviour, the timeline, the victimology, and so much more. And the coroner, Teresa O'Sullivan, will hand down her findings in Australia on February the 29th. So do go over to the podcast and give it a listen. Sally is an incredible woman. I want as many people to hear about Marian as possible because someone knows something. It might be a key piece of information or evidence that could just turn the case on its head. So please do listen to the disappearance of Marian Barter. And what I'll also say is that this particular case, well, it was a missing mum of 2 as well, Nicola Bulley, and there have been other cases since which I've talked about on my YouTube channel, but also on my social media platforms. And I do it to raise awareness, to amplify the case, because you all play a key role in solving cases, and putting the right information out there in the early stages and across the investigation is so important. And that's why I do what I do, to try and help. And I share my knowledge and my expertise essentially for free. And it does take a huge amount of my time to do it properly. And I know many of you really appreciate that. It's my way of giving back and raising awareness and helping with cases. And I know that there are some who don't appreciate what I do, and that's fine too. Just scroll on by. And it's really not an airport. I don't need to hear from you when you're leaving. So with that having been said, if you are interested, do go back and watch my other videos on YouTube, my Crime Analyst YouTube channel. Hit subscribe as well, so you don't miss out on automatic notification of future episodes. I've got a lot of very interesting cases I'll be covering across 2024. So let's dive back into Nicola Bulley's case and the College of Policing review, if you're sitting comfortably. So This week, actually, something interesting happened, and that was we learned about the retirement of Chief Constable Chris Rowley from Lancashire Police. He'll retire in March after 31 years of service. And is that something that we should be thinking about? Well, yes, because he was the senior officer in overall charge of the case, and it just seems like he is slinking off quietly out the back door after a disastrous handling of the case by his force. And in one of the articles, it was the Independent article, it was noted that the case was handled badly, and there was a lot of criticism for Lancashire Police. So that flies in the face of what College of Policing, what their review concludes, which was that the investigation was highly professional and delivered to a very high standard. Their words, not mine. So now we've got the chief retiring. Where's the accountability here? We've had the SIO retire early, the senior investigating officer, and I believe there was another senior investigating officer too, who didn't speak to the review team. I think it's different from Rebecca Smith. So it seems that there are a number of senior officers just quietly sliding out the back door. For me, the optics don't look good. And there's more to say about that. But I do wonder, particularly in light of Peter Fording's statements and more importantly, his sonar evidence and what's in this report as well, there's some real critical issues to discuss. And I will get to Peter Fording, but I'm not going to jump straight there because there's some other key points that I really want to revisit. This is an extensive review, 143 pages. And at page 18, it talks about the Family Liaison Officers and leadership. And that's an important section for me that I do want to focus on within this video. And I want to just quickly jump back to the crime scene management and control, because I've talked about the bench not being cordoned, but it was the POLSA lead, the police search advisor, who deemed it unnecessary to demarcate and preserve the area around the bench and see it as a crime scene based on the known facts at the time. And that was supported by an on-call detective, a superintendent and the investigating officer. I should just join that up properly. An on-call detective superintendent, so a senior officer and the investigating officer. And so 3 of them didn't believe there was a need to request a crime scene examiner. And I've talked about that you do the job properly from the start because you can never recover those forensic opportunities. But just to reiterate, none of those people were named, 3 of them. And this review stated that it was too early for them to have known that there was no third-party activity or criminal activity, that you couldn't rule it out. And this, for me, is another sort of no big deal. It's a big deal for me. But this review, everything seems to hang on the fact that Nicola was found in the water. And that seems to be what they rely on. Their working hypothesis was right because she was found in the water. But I'm going to underline the fact we don't know how she ended up in the water. Did Nicola fall or was she pushed? The coroner's inquest believed that she fell, but there is no real evidence that that's what happened. That's an assumption based on what's known. And I'll come back to that point. I do also think that Detective Superintendent Sally Riley must have been in play at this early stage, but there's no mention of her in the report. And also just this, well, let's talk about the inquest, because on page 37, the heading is Inquest. It's less than a page, and it begins with, I just want to read out what it starts with. The high standard of the investigation and search effort provided compelling evidence to the coroner about Nicola Bulley's precise movements on the 27th of January and the conditions of the river and riverbank. So all across the review, you've got this repetition that it's a high standard of investigation and search effort. And it just feels to me that, they feel that this kind of like, if they snake charm you enough, if they say it enough over and over, then you'll believe them. And what flies in the face of that is the 143 pages that say otherwise. Okay, so if it was so well handled, we wouldn't have 143 pages. And this, to me, it really is akin to domestic violence homicide reviews or serious case reviews, where the first line in the executive summary is, this murder could not have been prevented. And then there's hundreds and hundreds of pages how each agency failed the victim. You know, I wrote the guidance for domestic homicide reviews, for the process of domestic homicide reviews. It was my first law change with then Solicitor General Harriet Harman in 2004, and I trained thousands and thousands of professionals on how to conduct domestic homicide reviews. And that's a point that I make over and over and over again. You can't write "this could not have been prevented," but here are all the learning opportunities, here are all the things where we failed, and this is how we need to improve to get better. The two things fight each other. So that's just worth pointing out. It's a BGO, a blinding glimpse of the obvious. So let's get into the family and family liaison, page 37. And I'm going to give you the numbers just so that if you're a geek like me, you want to go through and follow along. And I know many of you are very detail oriented, and that's all what my work, my crime analyst work, is all about. Okay, so this section, it starts with, by the 30th of January, the Family Liaison Officer for Strategic Lead felt that Nicola's case was a critical incident and that a Family Liaison Officer, a FLO, was required. Now, they made the recommendation to the SIO, who we know from the press conference was Detective Superintendent Rebecca Smith, but she declined to deploy an FLO at this stage. And this was a time when there was heightened media interest in the case, and the Force Strategic Lead then spoke with the National Crime Agency National Family Liaison Officer, who also believed Nicola's case to be a critical incident. So the Force Strategic Lead spoke again to the Senior Investigating Officer, asked that she reconsider, but she declined. And she did put a SPOC in, a single point of contact, to the family. And it was later on, as I mentioned in part 2, that Rebecca Smith recommended that Nicola's case be declared a critical incident, but then it was a senior chief officer who declined, and they're not named, but they believed the community, and I quote from the report, to be extremely supportive. I mean, I don't know where he was taking soundings from, I really don't, but that's not an accurate assessment. Of course it's not. He also stated that he'd review that decision, but there's no mention of it at any of the so-called gold group meetings. So normally if you would deploy an FLO if it were a critical incident, one thing informs the other. So the fact that they didn't, that tells me it probably wasn't something that they really believed required that level of response. And national good practice and policy is there for a reason, but they chose not to follow it. And again, that's another no big deal for me. A no big deal in the report. You could, just pass it by, but it really matters. My friend and colleague, Duncan McGarry, actually created the whole family liaison post and process and policy and family liaison advisors and coordinators. I wonder what he might think of this. And also the fact that Nicola's family had asked the police early on about media engagement because they were being inundated, they needed help, and they were told that the media engagement team would be available to them. However, no contact was made with them until much later on. So again, I think about how that must have felt for the family, and it's no wonder that they felt so concerned about the lack of action and engagement and urgency and lack of information. And they were reaching out for other experts and people to come in because they were starved of knowing what was really going on and the lack of urgency. They must have felt that. And it wasn't until February the 3rd that the FLO situation was reviewed and an FLO was finally deployed to the family. Now again, 1 week on, that's not good practice. And the family was struggling and the media interest level had increased and they were very much left on their own. So this again is just too little too late. And like I said, this no big deal moment in the report, well, they're plentiful across the College of Policing review for me. And on page 42, there's a heading, Family Liaison Officers and the Media. And we become aware through reading the report that on February the 10th that there were 4 FLOs deployed to the family. And we also learned that they were the ones that were tasked with having to write the family's media statements for when Nicola's body was sadly found. The family liaison officers were writing, and this took me a while to get my head around it, the family liaison officers were writing the the statements. And they're not trained to do that. That's not part of their role. This for me is a leadership issue. It's not clear who tasked them with that. I wonder who it was, but again, it's not clear in the report, and it's absurd because it's not part of what they do. And by the way, the Family Liaison Officers, the flows came out of the Stephen Lawrence murder investigation and the review of, more in particular, the public inquiry that Lord Macpherson spearheaded into the Metropolitan Police's response. And the Metropolitan Police were found to be institutionally racist, and the Racial and Violent Crime Task Force was set up as a gold standard response to that. Out of it came Family Liaison Officers and Senior Investigating Officers' decision logs, policy logs. So some really good things did come out of that review, tangible things, practical things that are incredibly helpful, and they're very pertinent to this case. And on page 43, there's a paragraph right at the top of it that I've reread a number of times, and I'm going to read it to you. There was a critical need for someone with relevant media training and experience to assist in this family media handling role. The media and engagement team were drawn in to help on occasions, but were not close enough to the family to provide the assistance that was needed. This would likely have helped Lancashire Constabulary to better manage the broadcast interviews that the family gave, which instead were managed by a family friend. You see, so the media engagement team were there, but they weren't deployed to the family full time. We know that they weren't out. There was no cordon at the scene either, so they weren't there assisting Peter Faulding or anybody else at the non-scene, because it's not a scene, right? They never cordoned it, never declared it. And you see, in this statement, what I hear is, if we had someone close to the family, we could have controlled them better. I wonder what you hear. The conclusion of this particular section is even more confounding, and this is a conclusion. The Family Liaison Officers praise the leadership, accessibility and support provided by the Senior Investigating Officer and the Force Strategic Lead during their deployments. They fully recognise the value of this high level of engagement and support to their roles. I mean, that's peculiar as well, but the rest of this section is about backslapping what a great job they did, although they do acknowledge that there's a skills gap for flows, for FLOs, regarding media and social media when working with the families and also with other spokespeople for the families. But again, what I hear with those conclusions is we have to control families and their spokespeople better. And maybe that's unfair. But for me, the real problem is being sidestepped here. And that's treating this as a critical incident. That's what should have happened. Giving an urgent response to a report of a missing mother, securing the crime scene, talking with and engaging the family, and ensuring that they understand what's happening in terms of the investigation. Ensuring through your words and actions and your deeds that they're salient and that you create trust and confidence. You see, for me, it's quite simple. If you have their trust and confidence, if they have trust and confidence in what you're doing, they won't feel the need to bring other experts in or other people in or talk with the media. They won't feel the need. You know, I've always operated on the basis that you get the basics right and the rest will follow, and you don't get a second chance to make a good first impression. These are things that I've taught and trained police services on across the UK and across the world after catastrophic events, and communication skills and key and critical learning. You see, for me, what happened with Nicola's case, well, it just went from bad to worse. And I'm not being dramatic. I'm not a dramatic person. I'm very measured, but I did witness this firsthand, and I know many of you did too. We watched it unfold. So we don't want revisionist history or to be gaslit about what really went on. You see, the media fell out of bed with the police. There were clear trust issues with the police or towards the police after the press conference and after Nicola's body was sadly found. And I'm going to explain why. You see, the next section is the 18 pages on leadership, and at page 48 it states that there were daily grip meetings that were overseen by the Deputy Chief Constable. That's someone very senior. We don't know who they are because they're not named. It also states there was a command structure which was implemented on the 27th of January, led by a local chief superintendent. So that's the day Nicola went missing. Was that Sally Riley? And I suspect it was, because she did speak out in the media on a couple of occasions, but no one's named. So it talks about this command structure, but the gold command structure didn't come in until February the 1st, so 5 days after Nicola was reported missing. And we know from page 49 there were 3 gold commanders rather than 1, and there should only have been 1. And the last paragraph, it states that an actual gold command structure strategy wasn't undertaken until the 5th of February. So that's 9 days after Nicola went missing. So there seems to be this creep, but that seems to make more sense to me. And the fact that they didn't actually implement the gold command structure, they state until nine days on, so until the 5th of February. And that's when the local chief superintendent initially recorded the gold strategy, but it was very narrow in focus and the objectives were very narrow. So they amended that and widened it on the 8th of February. So that's now 12 days on. So remember the ticking clock. When someone goes missing, you've got a ticking clock. And we then learn from the report that the daily gold group meetings, well, the only people sitting on that group meeting was Lancashire Police. They didn't have any other statutory agencies or community groups or community members. It was just the police. Now, this is an important point, and it's the fact that gold groups, a true gold group is a strategic meeting that has oversight. It has strategic partners on the group to help give a different point of view and to critique the investigation, to think of things left field or outside the box. You also have independent advisory group members, so critical friends on the group to improve transparency and to improve communication and engagement with communities, i.e. you're working with them. That's the clue. You work with them. This isn't done to them, you're working together. But Lancashire Police didn't do this. And you literally can't make this up. They did none of the things that you would do if it were a critical incident. And that just leads me to believe that they didn't act like it was a critical incident. In other words, they just did their own thing. They disregarded policy, and they even disregarded their own in-house experts and their own senior investigating officer. I mean, that's breathtakingly bad. So just pause for a moment to think how they might behave to others outside the tent. How might they treat others who are outside of Lancashire Police? So we know on February the 15th, there was the press conference, the disastrous press conference. This is when the senior investigating officer said that Nicola had specific vulnerabilities. That for me was a huge red flag and a big problem that we were hearing that. And of course, some members of the media wanted to know what were those vulnerabilities. It begs that question. And the senior investigating officer wouldn't be drawn on that. But what's important here was that saying that there were specific vulnerabilities for Nicola wasn't communicated with the family beforehand, and it wasn't cleared by the family. And again, this is another no big deal in the report. There's no explanation in the report as to why. I mean, decision logs are important. You write down why you did something. On this day, I did A, B, and C because of X, Y, and Z. So why is that just left adrift with no explanation? And just to remind you of the context, there were 4 family liaison officers deployed to the family at this time. For me, there's no excuse. It just tells me the family weren't top of mind. And after this press conference, of course, it was disastrous. They took a decision to share information that Nicola was struggling with alcohol and the menopause. I've never seen this before across my career. Never seen it. Never seen a follow-up statement that's just put out to the press. You would expect there to be a background meeting, a closed meeting with trusted media to talk about these things for background right at the start, if it were that important and that relevant to the investigation. And this, for me, it's not just where it went wrong. There were lots of things before that where it went wrong, but this wasn't. The family were against this happening, but what choice did they really have? They were between a rock and a hard place at this stage. And really, it looked like they were blaming Nicola. I've talked about this, the victim blame. This is the bit that everybody seems to remember about the case, not all the other missteps before, and what was the intention behind this? Was the intention to divert and distract from other things? And I've talked about that. I believed that was the intention at the time. Go back and listen to my videos. I haven't changed my position off of that. And it was the next day, February the 16th, that Nicola's case was declared a critical incident, the next day. This is why I believe senior officers at Lancashire Police owe the family an apology, and there still hasn't been one, to my knowledge. There still hasn't been one. They created this situation. Leadership is the problem here, in my opinion. Starts with leadership, it ends with leadership. And the case was mishandled consistently throughout. And there's 18 pages that also supports that. 18 pages that support the fact that there was... Well, let's talk about the Family Liaison Officers again for a minute. I mean, for me, this is where on the 20th of February, you might recall Nicola's body was found, sadly, on the 19th of February, and then a female senior officer, after Nicola's body was sadly found, she gave a statement, read out a statement outside Lancashire Police headquarters on behalf of the family, and it was one that I've never heard this or seen this before either, that you've got a senior police officer reading out the statement, and she was extremely critical of the media. And it was this statement that was drafted by the police family liaison officers. It's this statement that created the mistrust between the media and the police. This was self-generated. It's not the police's role to do this or say this. It might be the family's point of view, but it's not for the police to say. And so journalists on page 74 of the College of Policing Review, they react to this, and they said that they felt that the police did this to blame the media and to deflect criticism away from themselves. And I have to agree. This for me is another no big deal moment in the report. This for me was another clear SPOB moment, single point of blame moment. You see, and I've seen this across my career when I was in the police service and being outside of it. For many years, I'd see the police try and create what one of my senior police mentors, someone called John Grieve and Bill Griffiths, what they would call a SPOB, a single point of blame. When things go wrong, you look for that single point of blame to deflect and shove the blame there. And I believe that's what they were doing here, in my humble opinion. And of course, in the report, I should just say there are multiple SPOBs that I believe Lancashire Police try and deflect and distract and force us to focus on several other SPOBs rather than look to them. And that's everything that this report, why it's so problematic. I've talked about the 7 pages regarding social media and the transition from positive sentiment to this 459% negative trajectory, and that this review doesn't even get into that. It doesn't even spotlight why this was. And again, it was self-generated for all the reasons that I'm discussing, that they were looking for SPOBs. The public aren't daft. We see, I'm one of them. I'm not in the police anymore, but you call it as it is. And like I said, they're trying to blame the media, Nicola, Peter Fording, everyone else bar themselves. I also talked about the fact they should never have released the specific vulnerabilities or the alcohol and menopause information. It doesn't matter. In this report, it says that it was legal, i.e. it wasn't illegal. That doesn't matter. It's plain wrong. And for me, it just felt like the misdirect and trying to shift attention and blame. I talked about that. And I'm not going to say anything more about that, because to me, that's the really obvious thing. That's the BGO, the blinding glimpse of the obvious. It's the low-hanging fruit. And when this report was released, all the media went for that. Google it, you'll see. They all talked about that. And yes, it's wrong. But there were other critical things that were wrong too. The leadership issues. That's where we should be focusing, the faceless leadership. And it's still faceless. And the senior officers just quietly exiting. They're sliding out the back door into retirement. They'll probably reappear as consultants because they worked on this case, and they'll be consultants to various people. And I'll also include the handling of Peter Fording, because really, every single thing that went wrong, it all tracks back to the senior leaders. And the fact that the family called Peter in to help, let's just think about that for a moment. Why? Why did they do that? For me, remembering back to that time, it's really simple. They didn't trust Lancashire Police. That's why they sought outside help. And let's not forget, Peter Fording offered his services for free. So the section about Peter starts on page 98, the Peter Fording section, as I call it. There are 13 pages about him, and I do want to take my time going through these 13 pages, his credentials and who he is, the fact that his founder and chief executive of SGI, he describes his services as a world leader in the fields of specialist rescue, underwater search, forensic search and protester removal. He was on the National Crime Agency's expert advisor database. He's advised on many cases with tangible results. And I'm going to get into everything to do with Peter Fording next time, and the sonar images. It's really a lot to share, and I have to do this in stages, otherwise certain things don't really make sense. So you do need to hear all of these details written within the report. And as always, I'm thinking about Nicola. I'm thinking about Nicola Bulley. I'm thinking about her 2 children. I'm thinking about her family. Remember, they're real people. This is a real case. It's not fun. It's not, just about, some people see it as entertainment, and it's not that. Real people, real cases, and it has a real impact. So please, when you comment, be respectful. So I'm going to end thinking about Nicola Bulley. Until next time, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instinct.